Monday, CBC launched the first of a three-part series called In the Classroom. For the first time, educators from around the province came together in our studio and spoke candidly about our education system. And what they had to say was disturbing. Part one focused on inclusion. All students of all levels of ability share the same classroom. But many of the teachers pointed to major problems with inclusion, from lack of resources to violence and even school lockdowns. I'm joined now by Gabrielle Young from Memorial University's Faculty of Education, and thanks very much for being here, Gabrielle.
It's an absolute pleasure.
The introduction that I just delivered, does that resonate with you, what those teachers are pointing out?
Absolutely. I think here in our province, teachers are ideologically in support of inclusion. They believe that ethically and moral, it's a human rights issue in regards to all students deserving the best quality of education. However, without the adequate classroom supports, teachers are often feeling challenged when they're meeting with the students a variety of needs and abilities, along with the behavioral supports that are not necessarily in place. So oftentimes classroom teachers can recognize the behavior, but there needs to be more support in regards to understanding the emotional and behavioral issues that underlie those behavioral challenges. And the support needs to be there to support the classroom teachers, because classroom teachers are equipped to teach, and there's lots of myriad of conditions that they're expected to face on a daily basis.
Can you describe for us the variety of students that a teacher can have in the one classroom?
Absolutely. We know 5 to 10% of individuals have an identified learning disability. That means that they're cognitively smart, but in one or two areas they're experiencing challenges, whether that's in reading, writing, or math. We can have students that have intellectual delays, that they're perhaps emotionally or intellectually behind their peers. There's students that have communicative challenges, whether it's autism, that need supports in regards to how the classroom day is structured. We're seeing lots of students with high levels of anxiety, so it's not just learning challenges, there's emotional and behavioral difficulties that are also accompanying these students into the classroom.
A lot of the teachers in our forum have said that they are forced so often to focus on those with the most severe needs first, and the children who just need a little bit of extra help fall through the cracks. What happens to those children over time?
If students don't receive that early intervention or support, oftentimes they develop poor self-efficacy. They don't believe that they can do the work that's presented to them, and that actually impacts their motivation and how they proceed in terms of tackling a task. So if students are dealt with or faced with numerous challenges in regards to reading, writing, or what they can do in the classroom, oftentimes students may choose to use behavior to deflect from what they can't do, and the reading difficulties they increase over time. So we know that strong readers continue to read and continue to make higher gains, but for the students that don't read at grade level and don't have the confidence to spend the time in reading, oftentimes for those students the gaps become wider and wider, and there is this cycle of learned helplessness and failure where students have repeated unsuccessful school experiences which lead to future not so great outcomes.
Why do we have this inclusion system?
We've moved from segregated classrooms when students would be within a school but placed in a certain part of the school. That was then perceived as not morally or ethically right. We then had an integrated model where some students would be working with their age level peers for part of the school day, but now we're moving towards inclusion where students, 80% of students spend at least 50% or more of their time within the inclusive classroom. But I think where we need to move next is towards a model of belonging where all students feel like they're welcomed members of the classroom, and that has to do with how the instruction is organized from the get-go, and teachers really need to take the time to get to know their students so they can plan to meet the needs of the students as opposed to relaying curriculum. Teachers teach students first, and so I think that's where we need to go.
The teachers in our forum said that the inclusive model needs to be needs-based, which is what you're talking about, but they feel that the system is based on budget concerns. What do you say to that?
Absolutely. Inclusion is not a cost savings device. And so when we think about inclusion, we think about every student's needs being met in the most appropriate environment. So for me, inclusive education means that some students may require direct reading instruction outside of the classroom. So to me, it's not a cost savings model. Placing every student in the inclusive classroom does not mean their needs are being met. They still require that small group just-in-time instruction. And I think without time into the schedule for that, teachers are feeling frustrated and students are, to some degree, falling through the cracks.
Is money, more money, just the answer to the problems?
Money is absolutely one factor, but it has to do with how we organize and structure our classroom. So I think that teachers need to have more time to co-plan if we're going to be pushing a co-teaching model. Teachers need to work together to think about how to structure groups, how to organize their activities so that they're presenting information in multiple ways and giving students different ways based on their own unique abilities to demonstrate what they know. So there's many factors.
Are teachers properly trained to deal with this model?
I would say that as we move towards an inclusive education, all teachers are special educators. And so I would argue that it's a shared responsibility. At present, our faculty of education and faculties of education across the country offer one required course in exceptionalities. And I would one. For Introduction to Exceptionalities. So in your year or 16 months of teacher education training, there's one course allocated towards students with exceptional learning needs. And I would argue that there should be at least a semester. Memorial is great in the sense that we do offer a Bachelor of Special Education. It's great, it's thorough, it's intensive. However, I would argue that every classroom teacher could benefit from more intensive training.
Is there some other province where this model is working?
In other provinces, some school boards do implement response to intervention, which means that in the early years there's screening for reading abilities. Based on needs, students receive more intensive research supportive interventions, and whether or not students respond to that will determine whether or not they need small group reading instruction. And so this model of providing reading interventions for all students without a disability, I think that's something we could definitely follow, because we don't want to have a model where we only support students when they have an identified exceptionality, and at that point the challenges are much longer, and that can be perceived as a wait to fail model.
A wait to fail model. Is that what we have here?
I would argue that at present we're identifying students in grades 3 or grades 4 as having a formalized reading specific learning disorder, and so ideally we want to provide supports for all students, because we know that the reading instruction that works for students with learning disabilities also works for your typical low achievers, and so ideally we provide that support earlier on so that students don't have a gap between what their grade level would indicate what they can do and their actual level of performance. So absolutely, without early intervention, we are promoting a wait to fail model.
Gabrielle Young, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.